Welcome, everyone. We are just going to give people about a minute to get into the webinar, and then we'll start. Okay, let's start. Welcome to the third showcase of the CFA Incubator Cohort 3 webinar series. I'm David Myers, the Executive Director of the Conservation Finance Alliance. Very pleased that you could join us for this webinar. We're going to share 2 projects out of the 10 projects that we've been supporting over the past year in the CFA Incubator, which is an incubator that's designed to promote and support innovation in conservation finance globally. And it was a competitive process to get in. We have closed a call for proposals for the next cohort, which will be over the course of this year. And we've had a great response to that. I want to really thank everyone involved in putting this webinar series together and in the incubator in general, so including our partners at Octo, who have co-sponsored this. So shout out to Sarah Carr, and our financial support, the Milky Wire through their Nature Transformation Fund in collaboration with Klarna, and all of our partners that you can see down on the slide below. All of our technical review committees, our mentors who have been just fantastic with the projects, and all the entrepreneurs themselves. So thank you all for doing such a great job, and also want to shout out my co-manager of the incubator, Stephanie O'Donnell, who's been just great turning this into a reality. So without further ado, today we have 2 presentations on sustainable finance in Africa, looking at tourism and other blended finance solutions. And the first presentation will be from Bhalin Singh of Prajna Ventures, who's going to present on the Global Green Visa, which is a modest, transparent contribution that's added to e-visa programs to finance prioritized conservation. And the second will be a presentation from Onkemetse, Nteta of IUCN, who will talk about the Transfrontier Conservation Area Infrastructure Finance Facility, which is a regional mechanism to support sustainable finance for infrastructure investments across transfrontier conservation areas in Southern Africa. So each presentation will have about 25 minutes. We'll do a presentation, then we'll have questions and answers. Please put your questions into the Q&A tab down below, and feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat and share information. We'll be sharing some information with you in the chat as well. And Bhalin, I'm going to pass it over to you. Thanks so much for joining us here, and look forward to your presentation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, David. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening. Thank you for your time today. I'd like to also thank the sponsors and CFA, and specifically Stephanie O'Donnell and David for your guidance in this process. And also my colleague, Chris Parker, who will be joining in the Q&A from Kingfisher Parker. So my name is Bhalin Singh. It's an honor and privilege to present the Global Green Visa to you all. It's been quite the gestation period, I would say. I want to give you a bit of my background so you kind of know where I'm coming from with this. I'm very much a social entrepreneur. I believe companies have a responsibility to do good in our world. My father was a big game hunter growing up. So from a young age, I developed a fascination for the natural world and consequently its preservation. I've been a tireless wildlife advocate all my life. So there have been several iterations of the Global Green Visa. Early on, I launched a t-shirt line where I designed the wildlife designs, and that morphed into a campaign called Live Give. And at the time, there was product red was hitting the market. The pink ribbon, as you know, these are licensing models. our model had to do with, dedicated to wildlife conservation. During that time, I also steeped myself into cars marketing and brand psychographics, if you will. Later, I created an NGO called Rock the Elephant. Again, I was addressing the elephant poaching crisis that was taking place in Africa at the time. And I held a fundraiser in Los Angeles for that. More recently, I co-founded and the creative behind a brand called Hedonistas de la Fe, which is this sort of premium mezcal brand out of Los Angeles. To this day, that brand still donates to Social Cause, which is a impoverished girls' school in northern Oaxaca. So there's been this through line. That's the sort of the arc of what's going on here. Um, a real deep commitment to wildlife conservation and outside the box thinking. So I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to fund conservation and its awareness at scale. And hence we have the Global Green Visa, which is a culmination of these experiences. Lastly, the slides that you're seeing, they're my artwork. So I'm an artist and the photography mostly is mine. Next slide, please, Christine. So our mission is pretty simple: to transform travel. Wait 1 second, sorry. Our mission is simple: to transform travel into a consistent revenue stream for lasting environmental and social impact. Next slide. Sorry, I'm just saving now. So as we know, the global conservation crisis, the numbers are pretty daunting. There's been a 73% decline in wildlife species in the last 50 years. Conservation is structurally underfunded, dependent on inconsistent aid, philanthropy, and limited government budgets. Biodiversity loss accelerates faster than existing finance mechanisms can respond. Nature needs sustainable funding. Next slide. The opportunity, global tourism. So this is the heart of what we're at here. Global tourism economic contribution generates almost 11 trillion in annual revenue. Less than 0.3% of that revenue flows directly into environmental conservation. Tourism is simply one of the world's largest untapped conservation engines. We plan to change that. Next slide. So how to enter the Global Green Visa. So we've developed a program, which is a public-private partnership that assists governments to develop credible, transparent, and impactful green visas. The program works with partner countries who want to fund conservation by adding this global green visa fee to existing visas. Excuse me. With our help, countries will seamlessly integrate secure technology enabled GGB contribution mechanism into their existing visa and travel systems. We'll capture tourism revenue and earmark for conservation. We will also be showcasing the country's natural heritage and impact through a global green conservation portal. Next slide. So how does all this work? Well, here's the flow chart of physically how it works. So the traveler from left to right will enter the country. We're using Rwanda in this example. They will pay their one-time visa fee. In Rwanda's case, it's $50. We're using $25 for the global green visa fee here. It's a one-time payment for the traveler. They enter the country. They pay their green visa. At that point, the monies will be split and kept into a separate account, the $25 that is, and we'll have oversight by us and in this case, the Rwanda Development Board. And that money will be ring fenced for conservation capital. In Rwanda's case, they have a national trust, if you will, called the Rwanda Green Fund. So we're using a number of 1 million visitors, $25 a year. That's 25 million at the end of the year that will be available to the Rwanda Green Fund. Again, part of our responsibility here is to drive this public-private partnership with the government of Rwanda, or RDB in this case. We are also working with African Leadership University on the ground. They're actually headquartered in Kigali. They will be helping us with data and conservation transparency principles, and also developing this conservation sort of storytelling platform that we want to create. Next slide, please. So essentially, we are a turnkey solution. We are going to provide an effective, seamless integration with the partner country's existing visa system. As mentioned, we would like to develop a real-time GGV conservation portal website that drives awareness and emotionally compelling content to travelers and citizens alike. As we are a third-party entity, we have independence, integrity, and public transparency, and with support of the African Leadership University. Next slide, please. So what does the Rwanda Green Fund, what can they do with $25 million? Well, they can do quite a bit. A lot of these countries have signed up for the 3030 Global Biodiversity Framework Pledge. Many of them aren't close to reaching it. This is definitely a step in the right direction. It also accelerate nature resilient agriculture, improve biodiversity research, expand anti-poaching patrols, and reduce human wildlife conflict. Personally, there's a few things I'd like to address. Human wildlife conflict is high on my list, and then girls' youth education are priorities, as the UN has consistently found that educating girls is the single highest impact investment society can make. Next slide, please. So we are seeking the right partners and the right capital currently today. Strategic connectors partners who can open doors to government stakeholders and explore our national global green visa. Capital partners, we're seeking seed funding currently to launch this with a pilot country and roll it out across Africa. Next slide, please. So to sum up, the global green visa is, at the end of the day, is a reasonable mandatory add-on traveler visa fee for a host country. This visa fee provides a consistent, transparent revenue stream for a country's conservation objectives. Model is designed to ensure funds are ring-fenced solely for conservation. The label is also committed to integrity, accountability, and international visibility. In essence, what we are doing is helping a partner country leverage and monetize their natural capital for the long term. I'd like to add, look, the status quo, what's happening out there, clearly isn't working on many levels. So this sort of public-private partnership offers a systemic change. It can be replicated and scaled across many countries that signed on to the 3030 pledge or the Paris Agreement for that matter. If a country wanted to do this, it might end up as just another tax, and most likely disconnected from transparency and a level of trust. So our opportunity here as a global green visa fee is that we get to reframe this into something positive. It is an open, transparent invitation for the global traveling community to participate and micro-invest in the future of this planet. As Jane Goodall was fond of saying, we all have a role to play. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bhalin.
David.
It's such a great concept, and such a great need to figure out ways to generate more funding for conservation from tourism, which benefits enormously from conservation. And so Please, to all, don't forget to add your questions into the Q&A, and we'll try to take a few as we go. So, very practical question to start with. How do we contact you? So, we will put your contact
You get
email
my
into the
Facebook.
chat. Yeah. Okay. And so that'll be a good start. And then, yeah, we had a question from registration, which was really interesting, from James. I think you're on the call as well. How have governments responded so far to this platform? Um, I think that many governments might be wary of a third party accepting funds on their behalf. Would you like to respond to that, Bhalin?
Sure. So that's a great question. So we don't touch the funds that come in. It's their sovereign funds. They'll be going into an account that's controlled by the government. It's just the idea here is it's going to be separate from, it's earmarked, it's ring fenced. And so, uh, you know, uh, will be paid a fee. This is actually public benefit corporation, or we're structuring it as such. So that will be paid, transaction fee or a management fee, but the funds will essentially be controlled by the government 100% of the time.
Sounds good. And the right approach for a type of visa thing, official visa. I just want to shout out to Sybil Reed Miller, who mentioned this really great study. Who maybe we'll copy and paste it into the chat so that everyone can see it. But tourism in protected areas does generate a lot of money. The challenge is that a lot of that money just goes to government. And this is especially the case in Africa with safari tourism, right? So government gets the money, a very small amount. In this study, I think was only about 2% went back to conservation. And I'm formulating a question from that. Bhalin, how can we be sure that the money that's generated from this additional revenue capture mechanism is going to produce measurable and visible conservation outcomes?
Right. I mean, another great question. So the reason we use the Rwanda as an example here is because the Rwanda Green Fund is actually very transparent. So they have a system in place to be, a smart pilot program for us. Uh, if there's a country that, doesn't have a national trust, that is something that we would have to address or work with the country. I'll just use Africa as an example. African parks carries quite a bit of weight, gravitas, in the countries they work in. So we would be looking for having NGOs as partners and creating a national trust that's all inclusive, from the government and NGO perspective, and ensuring that these funds are dedicated to where they say they're going. I can't, it's about as best as I can answer right now, but that's the idea.
Right. So it's a combination of the um, structure and transparency of the entity that's managing that, and then the third party verification. In this case, African Leadership University, right? So,
Right.
um, great. And another question, which is really interesting, has come up a couple of times here now, is how is the price set? Is there a willingness to pay study? Whenever you're adding a new, effectively, this is kind of a levy, right? You're adding a new levy to a sector, to an industry. It has influence on demand. So how are the prices going to be set? And how are you assessing what the potential impact might be, in terms of turning people away or having them go to other countries, for example?
Right. Good question. So we've done quite a bit of research, and in most of these countries in East Africa, or where there's heavy tourism dollars spent, the average visa right now is around $50. The average spend for somebody flying into one of these countries to view their wildlife is anywhere between $360 to $450 a day. We feel $25 is a an inelastic fee. And again, as I close in my presentation, if it's coming from the government, it is certainly a levy. We're not the government. We are turning this on its head and making it something that a tourist would want to pay for because we have a transparency, we have a through line of where the money's going and the impact it'll be making. So that's all yet to be played out, but that is sort of the goal of this, endeavor.
Okay, great. All right, so a couple more questions I'm going through here. How how do you generate? Are you covering your costs? Is there a fee that you're charging to this? How's it working from a sort of business point of view?
Yeah, so we're expecting that the revenue for this company, the Global Green Visa, would be a transaction fee, much like a credit card transaction fee, and probably a management fee paid by the government to run this program.
Mhm. Okay. Um, and another sort of follow-up question is that do you know what what a percentage you're going to charge on that fee? And if you don't know, it's okay to say you don't know. You're still
Yeah,
figuring
I
it out.
don't know. I wish I did, but I don't.
And it was not clear from the presentation whether the fee would be compulsory or voluntary. What are you thinking for this?
Oh yeah, it's
The
mandatory.
mandatory. So this would be anyone coming into the country, sort of like the Palau's pristine paradise fee.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would add one thing is and this has to be discussed yet, but we might be looking at a sliding scale, like a G20 nation might be paying the 25, a neighboring country might be paying much less than that, uh, if at all, depending, on how the negotiations go with them.
Right, of course, because there are sort of country blocks that have lower
Right,
visa fees for
yeah,
or no visa fee for
right.
travel within their block. So yeah, so you would integrate that in. Really great. And yeah, I'm trying to look into some of these more questions here. Yeah, why? I guess the questions come in is quite interesting. What is your argument to the governments for them to use the Global Green Visa and pay these management fees, no matter what they are, as opposed to them just collecting the fee directly and routing it to what is the benefit of going with Global Green Visa as it stands as a brand than the country just doing this on their own and routing it to their favorite conservation trust fund or their conservation trust fund or their
Sure.
other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good question. Well, my question is why haven't they? Uh, I think these governments are
Well, some countries have, right? For
yeah,
the
some
record,
countries have
right?
in our
Yeah.
research. I would say it actually supports our argument. But Palau, for instance, what you said, David, Bhutan has I think $100 fee a day. Belize has something similar. So there are a few countries out there that are doing this. Uh, and what I would say is, I think you would see this out there if it were doable. And you know, conservation is just be blunt about it. It's low on the totem pole. The priorities of these countries, and so we're offering them a way to fund this massive shortfall in biodiversity funding in a transparent way where it's not a tax. They're not increasing their taxes on their citizens. It's like a a very smart way of protecting their natural heritage.
Yeah. Okay. A couple other questions, sort of detail, like how is who's paying for the back end, sort of all the electronic e-visa transfer, financial, fintech? How does that all work?
Yeah, good question. So in Rwanda's case, they have a platform called arembo.gov. If we go with them as a pilot, they would be we would work with Arembo, and this would be a one-stop shop. We have a partnership with, well, I shouldn't say partnership, but we have a collaboration right now with Flutterwave, which is a huge fintech company. They're all over Africa, and they would develop the back end fintech model for us. It's actually much easier than I imagined. So they can split fees. It's a pretty simple mechanism, actually.
Okay, great. And then another question from James. What about countries that don't currently charge visitors visas? There's plenty of countries that don't charge a visa entry on arrival. Is there a way to kind of put this in place for those countries?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well,
So
there's nothing
it would be building from scratch, basically, I guess, right? So
right, right.
you wouldn't piggyback on their existing infrastructure, but you'd offer a whole
No,
fintech.
we would exactly.
Okay. Um, Great. And then yeah, I guess, and then another question sort of about what you had mentioned in the presentation that you have a kind of a platform that provides more information about the protected areas or something. What is on that platform and how does that add value to this?
Yeah, so it isn't developed. We have a beta that we're working on, but the idea is that I'll just walk you through it. If you're flying into a country and you're paying this global green visa fee, you can pull up this sort of spinning globe, like a Google Maps globe. You would zoom in exactly to where you're going. If you're going to a national park or a buffer zone or whatever it is, you can zoom in. There's enough real data and real time data out there now that we can provide that on this platform. So again, the idea is pull up the map, you zoom into this area you're traveling to, and if there's a program that the GGV is funded, it will pop up and give you that information. Uh, Again, part of this is, we want to tell emotionally compelling stories. This is not just like a dry database. So, the impact that it could have on a young girl's life in a rural village in Africa is real, and that story needs to be told, and hopefully we can execute that.
Okay. Now, I've got to give Sean Nazrali a shout out here because he's been asking such great questions. This one's, cuts to the bone here. Okay, what exactly are you offering except the idea itself? Because which is not perfectly new. So, like, if you could distill, and this will be the last question before we move on, Bhalin. So, if you could distill, um, if you could distill what your offering is in a couple of short sentences, um, why should a country go with global green visa rather than do it themselves or use someone else?
Well, again, this model is not insular. So if a country wanted to do it themselves, I throw the question back, why haven't they? A, because they have too many competing interests, I think, internally. Conservation's underfunded, I mean, massively underfunded. So my second point would be that, look, it's a global green visa. It's not a Rwanda green visa. It's not a Zimbabwe green visa. And there is sort of a unification of the global traveler, and it is a brand that people can relate to and connect to. Uh, and then I think you run up against doing this on a one by one basis from country to country. It's a $25 fee. That is a lot. It may seem a lot of money for a country to be taxing another tax on top of what they're doing currently. And as we know, when we travel, there's all kinds of ancillary fees. So I'm sorry if I'm going on a tangent here, but I want to address it. The bigger concept here is this funding would hopefully replace some of these smaller nickel and dime, uh, fees that we are charged as a tourist, because now the country will have a sustainable revenue model. Um, if they can do it on their own, uh, great. I'd like to see it.
Great. Well, as we know, some have, but as you say, many haven't, and it is an intriguing question as to why they haven't. And yes, and oftentimes it's a user pay model, right? And so the a lot of the money is captured at the site level, so because that's where people are visiting nature and that kind of thing. So, but any means, as Sybil had mentioned earlier, any means to like get money coming from tourism to the ground for conservation, as opposed to having it directed elsewhere, is certainly a great opportunity. And so, congratulations on the idea, and congratulations on the progress that you've made in the incubator. And thank you so much for the presentation, Bhalin, and
Thank
look
you,
forward to
Dave.
seeing what comes next. So
I do too. Thank you all.
great. And on that, I'm going to pass it over to Onkemetse, who will talk about the trans frontier conservation areas and how we fund the infrastructure. Onkemetse, over to you.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Onkemetse Nteta. I'm the Senior Program Officer in the SADC TFCA Financing Facility. And as you can see in that logo, the financing facility has already been established in 2020 and is currently operational. The logo you're seeing is of the SADC, the Southern African Development Community. So this is the organization that IUCN is managing this facility on behalf of. And as I mentioned, this was established in 2020 with initial funding from the German government. So the concept that I'm developing, the TFCA infrastructure finance mechanism, is there to support our resource mobilization efforts. So when most people think about these TFCAs, these conservation areas, most tend to imagine them as these, wide landscapes. There's never thought about how they get conserved. But for this concept, you have to think about them in two ways, To achieve the main objective of conservation, you need infrastructure, and we'll go through some of the infrastructure that's needed for that. And for the second objective as well, because most of these landscapes have a secondary objective of economic development, of benefit sharing with the local communities, of ensuring their welfare, there's a need for economic development. And in that case, you might think about them as these special economic zones. And to make them work, you need infrastructure. So the context of this financing mechanism is exactly that. To address this huge infrastructure finance gap that we have. We often speak about the biodiversity finance gap, but within that gap, there's this infrastructure finance gap for TFCAs in Southern Africa, but in general, also all conservation areas. So just for some context, the SADC TFCA financing facility, as I mentioned, was established in 2020 with funding from the German government. We recently managed to get some funding from the EU Nature Africa program, which will support the current ongoing call that you have on green economy. And the facility distributes this funding through various mechanisms. So we do direct awards, we do closed and open calls. And since the establishment of the facility, we've received and reviewed over 140 applications. And from those applications, we have several occurring themes. Wildlife corridor establishment, because some of the TFCAs are made up of individual parks or conservation areas. You need a way to connect them. There's need for funding for management, for improving management effectiveness, your flagship species conservation, human wildlife conflict, and livelihoods. So one of the key recurring themes that we've seen in some of these applications that we've reviewed, and also from our engagement with the wide range of stakeholders, is this issue of infrastructure. development. And as you see, the main goal of the facility is to support the SADC TFCA program, which is a long-term program to ensure the establishment, development, management of these TFCAs, is to establish new ways to finance these TFCAs, and to use the current funding we are currently getting from our international cooperative partners to crowd in new finance. So this concept aim to do exactly that, to figure out a new way that we can finance infrastructure. But as you can see, just for context, there are other key areas that need funding in TFCAs. So currently, from the 140 applications, we are able to allocate about 25 million to 35 million euros to about 28 projects. From those, we have contracted about 20. So when you look at the current portfolio of those 20 projects, a significant proportion of them include infrastructure development. And they vary from small grants to medium to large grants. And the types of projects also vary. You do have projects that are pure infrastructure and some projects that have more of an integrated approach, but with an infrastructure component. But the idea here is to demonstrate that infrastructure is a need out there for TFCAs and is quite huge. For the facility itself, this demonstrates already that we could deliver on infrastructure development through these mechanisms that we've already used, but there are also new ways that we can develop it and deliver infrastructure for TFCAs. So our critical mission, this is where we at the moment, our status quo. We have this major issue of the sporadic short-term funding for infrastructure specifically, and that creates problems for development of these TFCAs. As I mentioned, those two objectives for conservation, but also for economic development. It means that the current funding that we have for infrastructure, it does come at the high cost in terms of how we delivering infrastructure, even looking at issues about how we are procuring this funding that are coming through grants mainly. And you do often have this issue because you don't have all the funding that we need to deliver the infrastructure that you need. You end up having the infrastructure that's not the current quality, that's not the ideal quality. And that leads to high maintenance costs over the long term because you're not delivering that type of infrastructure that's high quality. The idea here is to move from this state to a state where we can have predictable funding for TFCAs, for infrastructure development. Most importantly, to have that infrastructure that's aligned to the development plans. So this is quite critical because similar to your protected area management at the individual park, there is a management plan that usually has infrastructure. TFCAs have integrated development plans that also have a component of infrastructure. So the idea is to have funding that is aligned to those plans so that you can deliver them, infrastructure at that level, to also deliver appropriate high quality infrastructure. That also speaks to that issue that we're currently having of high maintenance costs that we have because of some of this infrastructure that we're developing that get washed away by floods, rain, or that are not maintained. So going from where we are to that state will really come with these opportunities for TFCAs to deliver the kind of infrastructure that we need at the high standard. So the challenge that we have right now is the kind of scale that we're dealing with. The current funding that we have with grant funding, with public finance, is not enough to cover this huge scale. Currently, we have 13 TFCAs, but the scope to establish new TFCAs, that brings with it the challenge of increasing the financing needs for this. But on the flip side, this is the opportunity as well that we can present to our new financiers around the opportunities to scale. We just need to figure out the way to structure this portfolio and to design models that can attract that kind of funding. So at this stage, we are on this left side of the graph on that gray area. So we are getting most of our funding from grant funding, which are some of the multilateral funds, the official development assistance, the individual donations that we get, and also public sector finance as well, we've been able to figure out that there is some of that funding that flows to infrastructure. And it's important, and we will continue to raise this funding because it does address some of the areas where we can deliver infrastructure where there's a bit of high risk and where there's no expectations of return. But the idea here is to move towards the right, to end up in that other box where we can have access to private funding. And this is funding that we wouldn't have to use the current funding to lower the risk for that funding, for that finance, but also to think about ways that we can provide opportunities for a return for people who might invest in this infrastructure. And there are some of these mechanisms that are already in existence. So the idea here is not to reinvent the wheel, to come up with new instruments. The instruments are already there. It's just a matter of restructuring our program of infrastructure development to a level where it can attract this finance in this category of finance. So as part of the incubator program, I was able to engage with colleagues at SANParks at the Kruger National Park who are involved in infrastructure development to think about the first step of thinking about how we identify the infrastructure that's needed. And I mean, this exercise we just did quite quickly, so it doesn't give a full picture of what's needed, but most importantly is to demonstrate there are different types of these infrastructure categories. And importantly, this column of activities is quite important because we're not only interested in delivering the infrastructure, but it's about the activities of how we deliver the infrastructure. That's where the opportunities for impact, for social and economic impact are. If you look at the example of roads, for instance, the machinery that's needed, the contractors that are needed, those activities that go into that of appointing or building the skills in some of these TFCAs of appointing SMEs in these areas. These are the kind of things that we need to think about in terms of how we deliver the impact. And for some of this, we also kind of estimated more or less how much we might want to raise funding for, what would be those outcomes for each of those infrastructure types, and also the different types of mechanisms. So as you can see, we do have some that are mostly funded by public finance, and then we have some that have opportunities that can mix both blended, both private and public finance. So for this mechanism, we would need to look at different tiers of infrastructure. So the first tier that we looked at was the kind of infrastructure that can generate revenue. For us, this is quite important when you think about the scaling this initiative. These are the infrastructure that can pretty much pay for themselves. We already have models of how that works. These are in the typical infrastructure such as lodges, your restaurants, and shops. We will have to figure out the way of thinking about new arrangements. So the most important thing about this tier one is there's no need to be spending 100% of grant funding on this type of infrastructure because they can pay for themselves pretty much if you have the right mechanism in place. And secondly, there are some of these enabling infrastructure. So when you look at the conservation context, the TFCA context, some of the roads, the fences, all the infrastructure for housing, for offices, you can have the first tier without having the second one. The only difference here is some of these ones, they might not be able to provide direct revenue generation, but there is a way to figure out how to finance them using both public finance, grants, and private finance as well. The third tier that we need to think about is the public benefit infrastructure. So this is infrastructure that you need for supporting community welfare, participation of the local communities in nature-based economy. This includes the types of infrastructure such as your boreholes, your water infrastructure for sustainable agriculture, some of the craft markets, some of the community members in these TFCAs are involved in actual conservation, so they would need infrastructure such as some of this scout housing. They need infrastructure for some of the economic activities in the green economy as well. So these are some of the three tiers that we would have to think about this new way of financing infrastructure. For us, what this might necessarily mean is a change in how we do the work. Currently, the model is quite straightforward. Money comes from a donor, goes toward beneficiaries through those different mechanisms, but it's one way. This new way would require a whole new institutional arrangement. For the financing facility, it means a bit of a change in how we operate. The facility might have to get into the space of project origination in terms of how we bring together all these infrastructure projects. We already are in contact. We're engaging with the project implementing organizations such as the South African National Parks in this pilot phase, the organization that we work with. So it's just a matter of how we engage with them, how we bring all this pipeline of projects into one project. I don't expect that the facility would go from where it's at now to being a fund manager, but that's the space that we need a strategic partner for. For the South African context, in an obvious case will be your Development Bank of Southern Africa. To scale up the initiative throughout the region, your African Development Bank. These institutions are already in the space of financing infrastructure. So as I said, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. It's just a matter of aligning our interests, of partnering and collaborating on these projects. There is also a need for that engagement with our current international cooperating partners around new ways of funding. It might not necessarily always be the case that it's funded this way, where there's commitments, grants are given, then we report back to funders. It might mean outcomes payments kind of mechanism where infrastructure is delivered and then they pay afterwards. So it just means we have to think about the new ways of how we organize ourselves in terms of these new ways of thinking about funding. For the initial pilot phase, the idea was to look at working with South African National Park. So started in one country with 4 TFCAs. Yes, the idea is to catalyze this funding, but scale it up to the whole region. But to do that, we will have to start somewhere. So the idea is to start in South Africa with South African National Parks, looking at a 100 million euro fund purely for infrastructure development that can look at funding projects between 3 to 10 million euros that will have a duration of about 5 years to deliver infrastructure. And in terms of how that will work, I think as you've seen, there are various ways that these instruments can be adopted. But the idea now is moving towards a space where we can engage with those different partners, structure the infrastructure portfolio differently from how we're doing it now in order to realize this. For the next steps, I mean, the main thing would be to get this concept approved. Firstly, at the steering committee level within the TFCA financing facility, engagement with the SADC Secretariat about this new innovative finance mechanism, speaking with partners such as SANParks and also your institutional development finance institutions such as Development Bank of South Africa around the possibilities of partnering and collaborating on this initiative. So that's pretty much where I'm at now, and I'll appreciate any feedback from the attendees. Thanks very much. These are my contacts in case you might want to drop me an email. Thanks very much.
Onkemetse, thank you so much for presenting your ideas here in the facility. Obviously, it's been really an essential source of funding so far for infrastructure investment in the transfrontier conservation areas. You're proposing a blended finance approach here, basically, right? I mean, you talked about the 3 tiers with different return potentials. And are you thinking that this could that you would address all 3 tiers in one fund that would issue different things like grants, concessional loans, or are you thinking of different finance mechanisms for each of those 3 different tiers? Like different funds, different approaches, or is it all go in one fund?
For me at this stage, I'm thinking one fund. It can be, as I said, as you've seen in the current portfolio, there are some of these projects that are pure infrastructure, but some that are more integrated. I think there are some that can deliver that tier 1 infrastructure purely based on private arrangement where project generates cash flows that pay for the loan in this case. It might be from that fund, but then you might have those that might have more of a mix of that private, but then some of that impact or even the grants. And it will range, as I said, it will range from about 3 to 10 million. So our 3 million projects also do have that integrated approach, where you might have infrastructure, but you might have also green economy activities that are tied to that infrastructure, because infrastructure enables development, economic development. So I feel like it would be best if it's a mix that offers those opportunities.
Okay, oftentimes, an investment in or around a protected area is, remote. It's hard to get bank funding, finance for that, more traditional finance for that, and a blended structure is often helpful to have to reduce the risk and to improve return outlook, even for those return generating ideas. So you've got kind of the range of options, and I think it's important to and also I've seen funds that have tried to use return generating investment opportunities as a way to help subsidize those grants, for example, that they need because you need grants. So okay, I'm getting a couple questions in here. Please, for everyone, don't hesitate to put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll be able to answer them as we go. So one question came in earlier, which was, how when you're looking because you're looking at infrastructure requires long-term funding, and so how long does your funding, your current grants, for example, how long are they, and how long will they last? And you could probably stop sharing your screen, and we can just go with just the pictures,
Yes.
the video.
Yes, so they vary. We have small grants, like the one that I showed you now was about 50,000 euro. So something like that you can deliver in a year. Um, Targeted intervention for infrastructure for a lodge, that's 50,001, can be delivered in a year. But then you do have also some of the bit more complicated infrastructure projects that are 3 million euros that take about 3 years, give or take. So it does vary, but it depends on the types of infrastructure. If you are in a TFCA that's established and you want to put a lodge, depends on those approvals, but I think 3 to 4 years could be like that kind of time range for this type of infrastructure. So I would say around that timeline, depending on the kind of funding and then the type of infrastructure that's been delivered.
Hmm. Okay, and and a question from Sean here. What why are you thinking of this fund in sort of around only infrastructure? Because a lot of activities really need uh, to succeed, you need kind of a blend of investments. Let's take an eco lodge, for example. You need to build the infrastructure, but you also need to build the capacity, the human capacity. You need to make sure that you have, adequate conservation efforts around it and that kind of thing. Of course, you have all the corollary support services that you need. So is there a way maybe to think of these as investment packages rather than purely infrastructure packages? What's your thought around that? Obviously, the facility itself covers a range of investment types, so grant types. Just share some thoughts on that.
Yes, yes. So you're right. So the facility covers all the broad range. So we look at species, habitat, people. So all of those themes are already covered in the facility. But when coming to innovative finance, we sometimes have to simplify things for ourselves. So this funding, because of the kind of scale that you're looking at. So even if we were to do it to focus on purely on the roads, the amount of money you need to put in new roads or upgrade roads or to maintain roads in TFCAs on its own can be a fund on its own, just focusing on roads. I think the idea here was to simplify and focus on one type of intervention. That's why in the second slide, I show you the range of things that we are funding. But this is one of many models that we want to use to mobilize resources. The idea here is target at infrastructure, because already, as I said, a significant proportion of the money that we've already given is infrastructure. So by doing that, we make sure that we take out money that's would be going to infrastructure so that we redirect that towards core conservation. So what I'm saying here is we need a new way to finance infrastructure. Hence, I said there's no need to be financing this income, this revenue generating infrastructure using our grants. We should be channeling that money towards those tier 2 and 3 where you have less of an opportunity to get private finance. So it's actually we are looking at the same thing. I think the idea here is to lessen the amount of money that grants are being spent on infrastructure and then have some of this infrastructure being financed differently by that whatever mechanism, but to make sure that the tier 2 and 3 we prioritize grants for that type of need for conservation.
Okay, I see. So by sort of structuring and categorizing the different kinds of potential investments, you can see which ones can produce returns. And I think this is a general trend across what's happening now across the world because direct development aid has been restricted, and we need to start to think of uh, alternative ways to generate funding to different aspects of conservation. And where there is an opportunity for a return, a kind of blended finance vehicle or private investment can offset the need for grants, right? So if you can mix maybe grant for technical assistance, building a project design, and then come in with private capital, that relieves the demand for grant capital, as you say, for these other areas. So that's a very interesting approach, and yeah, I think you're on the right track for that. A couple more questions coming in here. For potential investors in these projects, how are you showing the benefit? Are you doing a kind of how will you show the benefit? Is it a social return on investment? Do you do an economic analysis? How do you prioritize, for example, certain investments over others?
Yeah. So as I said, for me, the next one of the major next steps is that whole gap that we currently have of bringing in the capacity to structure this type of projects. So from our side, we can form part of the structuring, but in terms of that economic impact, the KPIs, that's where we now gonna need to partner with your development banks that are very good at structuring projects that identify the impact. So already at this stage, we can identify your environmental impact. As I said, the infrastructure does deliver um, on the first objective of conservation. So when you put up fences, roads, it forms part of management effectiveness. So you can show how infrastructure can improve management effectiveness. You can show how infrastructure can deliver economic development. So park can generate more money. You can show how revenue increases for a park. You can also show how the infrastructure has delivered local economic development, welfare for the communities. So some of these things we already know, but in terms of for each instrument, how that is done, that's where we're gonna need that kind of expertise to come in because at this stage we are re-granting mechanism, but the expertise will have to partner with the experts on developing some of these KPIs for specific instruments.
Mhm. Great. Well, we do have more questions, and we'll share them with you. And if you could maybe respond, we'll post that information at some point. But I want to thank you, Onkemetse, for your presentation and for answering these questions. And I want to thank everyone for listening and sharing your questions. And really feel like we're making some progress here, but there's so much more to go. So your thoughts and questions are greatly appreciated. And reach out to Onkemetse, reach out to Bhalin if you have some connections and thoughts that you want to share or additional questions. We have two more webinars coming up, and we look forward to you joining us for those in this webinar series. And thank you for supporting the CFA Incubator. Thank you for doing all the great work that you're all doing around the world on conservation and conservation finance. On that, wishing you all a great rest of your day and evening, and see you soon.